Over the past few months, I've been getting more and more into crime dramas, specifically shows led by serial killers. There's just something about getting to psychoanalyze and really dive into the thought processing of a killer that I find wildly fascinating. And since I enjoyed the high points of Dexter so much, many of you recommended that I take a stab at watching Hannibal. And my god, am I glad I took that advice. Because now that I've watched all 3 seasons of Hannibal, I certainly have some thoughts on it all. Going into my first watch of this series, I had very little knowledge of the character Hannibal Lecter. I had of course seen Silence of the Lambs, but I hadn't seen the 2 follow-up films, Hannibal or Red Dragon. Merely just a few clips on YouTube from those films, one of Hannibal feeding some dude a piece of his own brain, and one of him hanging a man who he had just sliced open. So I didn't really have much of a reference point on what to expect, outside of the fact that I knew he was an evil person at his core and a cannibal. But much to my surprise, Hannibal isn't really even the main character of this series. I would argue that Will Graham is truly the lead character here, and this is especially true of Season 1. Will is a deeply fascinating figure. Him being on the spectrum and having the ability to sort of slip into the mindset of these high-level and mentally disturbed criminals is A, just a brilliant concept for a detective/crime solver, and B, is visualized so beautifully through the sort of reversed shots they use. Almost as if Will is reliving the crime, as he slowly reverse engineers how the killer did everything by putting himself in their shoes. Which beautifully feeds into the main narrative of this first season, which is Will's struggle of disassociating himself with Garrett Jacob Hobbs, the first man he was forced to kill. You see, in his attempts to psychoanalyze all of these killers and put himself into their minds, he gets too close sometimes, and starts to feel as if he's done the horrible things that they've actually done. It's a very unique burden to bear and an extremely mentally taxing one. He even describes the killings that he reverse engineers as if he's the one committing these heinous actions. Will says things like, "It's my design, then I shoot." It's as if he's reliving his past actions and not theorizing the actions of someone else, which is why his disassociation feels so natural and real. And having such a fragile main character who is quite literally on the cusp of mental collapse was the perfect setup to introduce us to the real Hannibal Lecter. Not the fake persona that he puts on for the outside world, but the monstrous individual who lives underneath that empty husk. And Hannibal is simply a phenomenal manipulator and gaslighter, perhaps the best in television history. He is someone who can cause you to unravel and self-implode without lifting a finger. And this will always be the most terrifying type of villain in my opinion. It's almost akin to something like Heath Ledger's Joker. Hannibal does all of this just out of morbid curiosity most of the time. He's simply interested in how people will react to his subtle manipulation, and has a sick desire to take in the chaos he creates. I also love the fact that Hannibal has an ego to him. When he hears rumblings of someone else taking credit for being the Chesapeake Ripper, Hannibal stages a crime with Miriam Lass's arm just to make sure everyone knew that Gideon wasn't the real Chesapeake Ripper. And the fact that Dr. Lecter uses the brutal maiming of his victims to hide the careful surgical harvesting of their organs is disturbing, but also speaks to who Hannibal is fundamentally. He's a wildly troubled yet sophisticated man who might just be the most intimidating serial killer ever put to screen. Outside of Hannibal himself, I think Tobias was my favorite of the serial killers featured in this first season, as his interactions with Hannibal were quite enlightening, and seeing Hannibal in action was great. Even though he was caught off guard during their fight, he's quick thinking on his feet as he immediately snapped Franklin's neck, and then eventually systematically took out Tobias, despite Tobias's initial advantage given that he had a weapon and Hannibal did not. In fact, I kind of feel like he allowed Tobias to get a few licks in order for the crime scene to look legitimate. Now, when Hannibal discovers that Will has encephalitis, I feel like the season really stepped up a notch, from just a really good show that I was enjoying to a truly great season of television. Will is my friend. We will put out the fire if it's necessary. I mean, that is such a cold line from Hannibal. He truly operates on a different wavelength. He's a manipulator and puppeteer of the highest order who is willing to watch his friend in torment just to feed his curiosity. And the way in which Hannibal used Will's autoimmune disease to frame him for all the murders that Hannibal himself committed was so masterfully done and just made me viscerally hate him. I was genuinely getting upset watching his actions, which is something that rarely happens to me while watching TV or film. Jack Crawford is also another great character that I at least want to touch upon, because I loved how he played off of Will in this first season. Jack would essentially give you all the hard facts and exactly what occurred at these crime scenes, just like a cop typically would report, but then Will comes in and explains why these crimes may have been committed through the eyes of a mentally ill person. And that contrast was always very interesting, and I completely understood why Crawford felt like he needed Will's aid in order to solve these murder mysteries. Now, I love horror as a genre. I've watched every Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and Child's Play film, even the really shitty ones. Blood and gore is typically perfectly fine and enjoyable for me to watch, but this show made me physically wince on multiple occasions. When Hannibal is making these human organs into food, I get a viscerally disturbing and unsettling feeling that it's hard for me to even describe. This is quite literally the first TV show that I could not watch while I was eating. If and when I tried to, I either had to stop eating immediately, turn off the show, or risk potentially throwing up. And you may think that this would be a negative, but for me, I was honestly impressed that a show could have this effect on me. Overall, I'd give season 1 of Hannibal a solid 9 out of 10. I felt that it took a little bit to get going initially, and this is certainly a show with very little to no comic relief, but once the show hits its stride, I became fully entrapped in it. This was a great season of television. Going into season 2, I was a little worried about how interesting the show would be going forward with Will in prison now, but we start immediately with a knockdown, drag-out fight between Jack and Hannibal, and then get told we're going back in time 12 weeks, so this isn't a dream sequence or anything like that, merely an awesome, violent endpoint for us to now look forward to and build to throughout the season. And at first I wasn't a huge fan of this because I envisioned a straightforward story where Will is on trial for the whole season, and then eventually at the last second he manages to prove his innocence and that Hannibal is the real killer, which would then lead into this fight between Jack and Hannibal. At least that's how a standard show would build to a fight like this, but Hannibal is simply not a standard show. And by the time we got to the finale, there was genuinely moments that floored me and caught me so off guard. But backtracking a bit, I must say that I love the creativity within the filmmaking all throughout the series, but it is certainly on full display in season 2. For instance, at the start of episode 3, while Will is preparing for his first day in court, we see Hannibal reflected in the mirror as Will is getting dressed. And A, this is just dope from a visual standpoint and looks cool, and B, it's beautifully symbolic as Hannibal is the man that should really be on trial. A lot of shows that are flashy like this kind of get to the point where they're more style over substance. However, I felt that most of this series, especially season 2, did a great job of creating narrative importance and symbolism within its flashy and stylistic editing. Even just small things like the time-lapsed establishing shots go a long way into creating a unique visual style and presence for this show. As we see Will slowly regaining the memories that his encephalitis caused him to lose, we again get this show's great visual style infused into these key moments. Rather than just replaying the scene where Will had Gideon at gunpoint in Hannibal's house prior to his seizure, we get to see Will watch the scene unfold from his jail cell. So the addition of Will behind bars in the background of the shot adds something new to the scene, but also provides us with a visual metaphor to read into, as Will walks out from his jail cell at one point and starts interacting with the sequence. This of course visually representing how Will is unlocking these previously lost memories. While he may be physically restrained in his prison cell, his mind is no longer shackled by an unreliable memory. Now, in the previous season, Hannibal noted numerous times that Will is full of empathy for others, even for the killers he helps bring to justice. But in trying to have Hannibal killed, we get the first occasion in this series where Will completely lost empathy for someone. Hannibal killing Beverly was sort of his last straw, and he just wanted Hannibal to pay in that moment, no matter the cost. And moments like these do a really good job of setting up Will's character arc this season. Now, post Will Graham being acquitted, I initially found it a little weird that we essentially just went back to normal. Will is simply just back to working with the FBI and having therapy sessions with Hannibal. Me personally, I think I would have gotten the fuck out of Dodge and left all the crime life behind. But narratively, this does lead into a cold war of sorts between Will and Hannibal, where Hannibal is essentially trying to forge Will into a killer similar to himself, and Will is trying to convince Hannibal that this manipulation is succeeding. The scene where he and Will are eating what Hannibal believes to be meat from the now dead Freddy Lands was so unsettling. The depths to which Will was willing to go in order to catch this fish to arrest Hannibal was truly shocking, but also understandable. Hannibal operates on a completely different level, and if you're gonna get him behind bars and in a straitjacket where he belongs, it's going to take a mammoth effort like this. And the show did a great job of playing coy with whether Will was in fact truly on Crawford's side or really wanted to run away with Hannibal. Circling back to the last 2 episodes, the twists and turns that the show took us on as we reached the finish line of Season 2 simply left me shocked time and time again. We just get so many great moments, from Mason Verger literally eating his own face, to Hannibal smelling Freddy Lands' scent on Will, which tipped him off to Will's betrayal, and of course the reveal that Abigail Hobbs was actually alive this whole time. I had no idea where this roller coaster ride was going scene to scene over the course of the finale, but I was enjoying all of it. And the end note of Hannibal literally gutting Will, leaving both Alana and Jack on the brink of death, and then slitting Abigail's throat in front of Will was such a brutal way to close out Season 2. Overall, I'd give Season 2 of Hannibal a 9.5 out of 10. I don't really believe in perfection, but this is as close as you're going to get to that elusive goal. This is easily one of the best seasons of television that I've ever watched unfold. This is definitely up there with the likes of Breaking Bad Season 4 in my opinion. The cat and mouse dynamic between Will and Hannibal certainly rivals that of Walter White and Gus Fring. And given just how phenomenal these first 2 seasons proved to be, I couldn't dive into Season 3 fast enough. And then Season 3 was a pretty big step down if I'm being brutally honest. Hannibal is a series that is very unique because it is pretty much an all-out thrill ride from the very first scene of Season 1 all the way through the final shot of Season 2. There's not many times that the show slows down in terms of crazy events consistently happening. And as I mentioned in passing previously, there's not really any moments of comic relief either to break up the breakneck pace of the show. And this worked for me in Seasons 1 and 2 because of the pacing and the fact that we had an unreliable narrator in Will, so you were constantly on your toes and invested because things were happening so fast, and you never knew if what you were seeing was real or not. But this was lost in Season 3. Will is no longer an unreliable narrator, and the pacing is much slower, at least for the first half of the season. And the 2 main characters that primarily bored me to death in this season were Chio and Bedelia. Chio is essentially a nothing burger that goes nowhere, so every moment spent with her felt like wasted runtime. And Bedelia is one of the most frustrating characters I've ever watched in all of television. The way in which she speaks always pissed me off. Like, she just talks so slowly and drones on as if what she's saying is the most profound thing you've ever heard. Touch gives the world a physical context. Like, no fucking shit it does. Can you try talking like a normal person and not in half speed? Seriously, I have no idea why Hannibal finds this chick so interesting. She just talks in Philosophy 101 quotes. Now, on the positive side of things, when the show went for big moments, it did certainly still deliver. The close of the Mason Verger storyline was very good, and the scene where Verger wakes up with his surgeon's face on his own rather than Will's was absolutely chilling, and awesome in a way that only the series Hannibal could be. And honestly, I think Verger and Jack Crawford saved the first half of Season 3. Somehow they're the only 2 characters with any form of passion. Everyone else was just so emotionless and melancholy for some reason over the course of the first 7 episodes. The second half of Season 3 though was much better with the Red Dragon, and it took me a bit to warm up to him, but by the finale I felt he had become a worthy adversary for Will and Hannibal. Attempting to become a fictional character from a painting is rather absurd, but all the killers in this series have a screw or 2 loose, so I felt that he fit right in as one of the better serial killers to be featured in the show. And I really liked the finale, up until we got that post-credit scene. The idea of Will finally making a stand and finally deciding that he has to kill Hannibal as he embraces him and leaps to both of their deaths was a symbolic and fitting end to everything. because even if he had only pushed Hannibal to his death, a part of Hannibal would always live on in Will. But then we got to that post-credits scene with Bedelia's leg being served on the dinner table, and I'm pretty sure the showrunner confirmed that both Hannibal and Will survived. Call me old-fashioned, but I like when villains, especially villains on the level of Hannibal Lecter, get their penance. If you're going to make a series that focuses on a lead character who is a villain, it is imperative that you're ready and willing to punish them properly when the time comes. And to me, the show failed to do that. But the beautiful thing about a season 4 likely never happening, as a fan, I can just ignore the post-credit scene. I choose to live in a world where both Will and Hannibal died after their fall. All in all, I'd give season 3 a 6.5 out of 10. It was a wildly frustrating season for me personally, and the Red Dragon arc in the final episode of the first half saved things big time. If we kept on the same trajectory as like the first 6 or 7 episodes, we were heading for a disastrous 4 out of 10. But as is, it was a kind of weak but alright close to a great series. Well, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Hannibal. What do you think I got right, and what do you think I got wrong? And what would you rate the show overall? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like or subscribe. I'll also have a playlist linked with all of my I Have Thoughts style reviews in the description. So if you're curious as to what I thought about shows like Dexter or Death Note, you can check those videos out next. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.